Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Blood Simple. This film came out in 1984. It was written and directed by Joel and Ethan Coen. Joel and Ethan Coen are legends of American filmmaking, and they really don't need much of an introduction at this point, but I will give them a short one. When I think about these two, just overall, I think to myself, they're very knowledgeable. They've really done their homework. They've studied the classicists. They've studied noir, the Hitchcock era, and all of that. And I think they've taken a lot of those great staples and a lot of the narrative elements, and they've updated them. They've given them kind of a grisly sort of edge, often making very cynical allegories expressing the decaying morality of society. But always, as I say, with a bit of humor mixed in there. They've also proven themselves to be very diverse. You know, they've made all kinds of movies over their career. I think they are maybe most known for more of their like satires, their black comedies, and some are more simple than others. And then there are some that are maybe even a little bit more experimental and philosophical than others. But you know, they had to start somewhere, and Blood Simple is that somewhere. I think this is a really concise, really nice, very well-made film that's kind of a perfect introduction. It's like the perfect way to start off a career, especially once you see the trajectory that they chose. It kind of covers a lot of the bases in terms of themes and aesthetic that they wanted to focus on and cover throughout the course of their career, especially as far as their philosophy. It is in this film done in a more broad sort of way and maybe not as fully formed, perhaps not as complex as it would be later on, but it's still very strong. It's clear that there's a solid core here. And if you knew nothing about these guys and you watched this movie and I said this is their first film, you would probably think, yeah, these guys, they're gonna do well. They're gonna make it because they just know how to make a film. Simple as that. I say it's simple. It's really not that easy. I just love how well versed they are in classical filmmaking and genre filmmaking. They're obviously both very well educated, and it shows. Not that that necessarily matters, but I think it's really contributed to their greatest strengths. Finding a way to take a lot of very stale, conventional elements of other films and giving them a spin, making them fresh, and then introducing, kind of blending other genre elements in there is really difficult to do in terms of being able to make it your own again. And it's neo-noir. It's not noir from the 40s. Obviously, things were very different then, and like the moral tales and the allegories are going to change, especially for like a postmodern generation. To me, this movie is capturing primality, I think, above anything else. Just basic urges, simple impulses, and like, you know, decisions that are made because of a misunderstanding or out of just sheer stupidity. Just naturally, there's a strange sense of humor, a bizarre sense of humor that can come out of that sort of darkness. No matter how grisly it is, if it's stupid, you can't help but kind of laugh at it because you're a voyeur. And I think that's what they do really well. Even in this film, though it's not as funny as a lot of their other films, there's hints of it, hints of satire, and amidst a lot of that modern grit and that carnage. It feels like a neo-noir that was shot like on a Western set or something like that, with it has like a cheap, very pulpy, sort of pungent quality to it. And the violence really resonates in a lot of ways. It reminded me, quite frankly, of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original one from the 1970s. It has a lot of those elements of slasher films. It's really intelligently choreographed and well built, and there is an attention to detail that I really respect. They set up very simple suspense devices that foreshadow in very classical sorts of ways. As an example, like the incinerator in the background where Ray is in the foreground talking to Julian. The sound of the fan slicing through the air. It's very eerie, and that's part of the tension building, but it's also kind of funny because they keep going back to it. They really understand the nature of small town America, and that is one of their staples also as filmmakers, doing very brutal, twisted murder stories amidst the backdrop of, you know, like the Texas countryside. I'm from Texas, so I can tell you that, you know, they capture certain elements of that state really, really, really well. The use of color and the neons in the bar, I think, are some really good shots. The textures, the sounds of like the wood creaking and like the sawdust on the floor, the mosquitoes, the sound of the radiator. It captures that humid, rural twang of the South, and it's all in the details, being able to incorporate all of that into the story, into the characters' lives, and into the scenarios, especially as they become more and more outlandish and dangerous. And it makes everything feel more resonant. And yes, it's just a bloody revenge tale. It's quite simple, as the title suggests, and there's really almost no fat to trim when you watch it. And that's another thing that I really love, just really having the instinct for knowing when to stop, when to edit, when to say cut, not being self-indulgent with like unnecessary plot threads or set pieces. And the main story, as thin as it may seem, I think it's kind of perfect the way it is. I think it carries a lot in it that captures the essence of human behavior in its most basic form. For me personally, this movie is about aimless relationships. It's about professional aimless relationships. It's about romantic aimless relationships. There's a point in the film where that becomes very apparent, especially with Abby, who obviously is running away from a husband who's clearly abusive, that she's running away with a different lover. But the truth is, she is not running away from one to go get married to the other one. I mean, I don't think that she knows what she wants either, and that's pretty clear. Do either of these men love her? No, I really don't think so. And that's actually my favorite, or one of my favorite parts of the movie, is where she has that dream towards the very end where she sees her husband and she says she loves him, and he says, "You're just saying that because you're scared." And then that line is repeated by Ray. He says the exact same thing to her. He's like, "No, you're just saying that because you're scared." But the fact that it comes from a dream and is spoken by somebody else who is very integral to that triangle there, and that it happens again, I think gives it a very interesting sort of surreal layer. And that's another thing that the Coens would experiment more with later on in their career, more dreams and how they bleed into reality a little bit. For me, this movie has a lot more in common with something like No Country for Old Men than it does something like Fargo or, you know, like The Big Lebowski. And I honestly think with No Country for Old Men, which of course came out years later, the whole intent with that was to strip things down and return to their comfort zone, return to the style of filmmaking that was like Blood Simple, that made them famous in the first place, because they had had several unsuccessful films up to that point. But I have to say, and I know people are gonna probably hate me when I say this, and I admit I can't quite say this definitively because I would need to see No Country for Old Men again, but I think I like Blood Simple better. There are sequences I prefer in No Country for Old Men, certainly. I think overall the filmmaking in that is just nothing short of extraordinary, but overall narratively, I think Blood Simple sits with me a little bit better. My issue with No Country, which, you know, I did review it years ago, so you can go and watch that, but it was with the Javier Bardem character, the sugar character, which to me felt like a very simplified archetypal device in a movie that really wanted to be more complex in terms of exploring that morality. It felt like two filmmaking points of view brought together that just don't quite gel with me in terms of tone. Whereas here in Blood Simple, the four main characters at the center, they are very simple, similarly to Anton Chigurh, that are converging in the same way. And I think maybe I just prefer that consistency to it. You know, it doesn't feel as disjointed, and it is, yes, more straightforward. I don't feel that either film is fleshed out on the level of Fargo. To me, that film it captures the perfect sense of balance between, you know, like satire and black comedy and, you know, like things that are very lighthearted as well as very brutal. So in terms of like the small town murder stories for the Coen brothers, that one is likely my favorite. But again, I really like this movie a lot. It does feel like a beginner film, certainly. It feels like an exercise, yet it covers everything that is expressed in the thesis, and that doesn't happen very often. But it does it with real bravura and real skill, far beyond, I think, the experience level. And it sets a stage, I think, for all of the very unique allegories that the Coen brothers would eventually share with us, that are tales about, you know, morality and how distant we are from the clarity of those morals as a collective. No matter the town, you know, you can be on Wall Street in New York City, or you can be in the boonies of Texas, or the snowy plains of Fargo. We are all painfully pathetic and morally conflicted, and just sadly human. And that's what the Coen brothers have always said to me. But I do recommend this film very strongly if you have not seen it. That is my review. Thank you all so much for watching. You will see here my Patreon supporters. The link to support for that is below, and all my social media and everything is below that. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.